Again, under the module of dealing with the failure of existing strategies, let's take a look at the two concepts of ownership and stewardship. I mean, we've talked about Enron and the failures, the accounting failures of all of those companies in that era. And we've talked about Sarbanes-Oxley and Bill C-198. So we have an idea of the essence of the problem is that gladiator mentality. And let's see now how that sort of translates in on a more practical level in the corporate environment. So first of all, a traditional company is supposed to be structured so that it is responsible ultimately to the shareholder. What happens is the shareholders buy stock. Since there are thousands or tens of thousands of shareholders, they get together and they nominate and hire a small, or nominate and in some cases hire, a smaller group of people, 10 or 12, that will look after their interests. And the interests of the shareholder are profits and return on investment. This small group of people is called the board of directors. The board of directors essentially is supposed to meet twice a year at least, traditionally, review the financials of the company, and make broad and general decisions regarding the future of the company, as well as hiring the day-to-day operational management of the company. So the board of directors would be responsible for hiring the president and all the vice presidents, marketing and finance, etc., etc. So they would be hired by the board and they would report to the board, and the board is supposed to represent the shareholders' perspective. The final layer, the departmental management, is of course hired by the executive management, and they are essentially there to distribute the tasks that the executive committee has, and again in terms of making sure that the financial plan of creating the greatest return possible for the shareholders is met. So that would seem to be, a pretty rational and intelligent system. How did that Enron happen? How did Jeff Skilling violate accounting law if there was a board of directors in there supposedly watching him? How is that possible? How do any of these scandals happen? What happened to the board of directors? Where are they? They're supposed to be representing in a public company. We're not talking about a private company. In a public company, they're supposed to be representing you and me if we're shareholders. What went wrong? The simple truth is, and it's not too complicated to see, once the board of directors is chosen, rather than representing the views of the shareholders, who are very often distant and unconnected to the board of directors, rather the board of directors is more closely connected to the executive committee, and they collude together to accomplish not the goals of the shareholder necessarily, but to accomplish the goals of the executive committee and the board of directors. And that's why you see many of the chief executive officers of companies getting paid millions and millions of dollars with stock options, with all kinds of expense accounts, and all kinds of golden parachutes, and all kinds of deals that are arranged for them by their friends in the board. collusion violates legally and the spirit of the law and the intention of the board of directors. And that is a major failure. So one of the things that we see is that in order to create this integrity and transparency in the board of directors, one of the things obviously that has to be changed is the nature of the relationship. So the moment that Sarbanes-Oxley came into the picture and suddenly made personal liability part of the deal, now the board of directors that are aware of this and the executive committees that are aware of this, and I say that because in my experience most of them are not, start behaving differently, but for the same reason, which is they're guarding themselves. The second thing that has to happen, and it's happening in some companies, is the entire method of remuneration has to change. You can't hire a chief executive officer and pay him 50 or 60 times what the average worker is getting paid. It's just irrational. First of all, it's a drain on the business. It reduces the profitability of the business, and it's not reasonable for the work that's being done. Excuse me. The second thing is how they're being paid has to be changed. If you are giving them all of this money based on their achievements in manipulating the share value, then all you're going to get is a manipulated share value. Sometimes that manipulation can cross the line and become unethical or illegal. So we have to change how we remunerate people. Perhaps, as is being done, we have a triple bottom line remuneration plan where executives are not only remunerated for financial results, but for societal results in the culture of the company. In other words, how are people performing, measured by turnover rates, satisfaction surveys, like we have here at the end of every term. The students get a chance to give feedback on the teachers, and I certainly read everything and try to improve according to what's improved, and whatever you think is great, that's wonderful too. But we're using that system, that triple bottom line. And then, and as well in terms of sustainability, what are we doing with whatever resources we need, whether they're human resources, natural resources, produced resources? How are we dealing with those, and what plans are we making? And we have measures for those as well. That system of remuneration now totally changes the responsibility of the executive group, because they are now being forced to consider, well, even though we might make more profits, if we have a greater attrition rate in staff, that's going to reflect poorly on the triple bottom line, because they're not only looking at what happened to the share value, because certainly you can increase share value by severely abusing your employees and your staff, but it's a short-term strategy. So trying to create the real challenge then, instead of ownership, I think the proper word that maybe we want to introduce into our conversation is stewardship. Your responsibility as the CEO of a company, as the manager of a division, is not the ownership of that and feeling connected through ownership, but rather stewardship. Stewardship means I'm on the boat for a certain amount of time. The boat was there before me, and the boat needs to be there after me. And therefore I have to conduct myself in what would be called a sustainable manner. I should be rewarded for being sustainable in the way that I pursue the growth and the profitability of the company. And I should be able to hand off this company to the next generation in a stronger, more viable position. That's healthy for the shareholders. That's healthy for the employees. That's healthy for the customers. Everybody is protected by that idea. So how do we get these managers to think outside that little box of profitability and do this? So as I've mentioned to you before, the box represents the constraints. If we want to change managers' thinking to be outside the box, it may be that as the board of directors, we have got to change the box. Or as executive committee, we have got to change the box. And the simplest and fastest way to change that box, as we've mentioned, is to alter the remuneration plan, so that you're not only rewarded for growth in share value and profitability, but that you're rewarded for the growth in the happiness of your employees, in the development of your employees, in the ratio of employees to product, etc., etc. I mean, there's so many different measures that we can bring in to this equation. That way, we don't only grow the share value, but we grow other aspects of the company, which may impact the share value. For example, happy employees means that you have less employees because each one of them works harder. I mean, it's not complicated. If you have a group of unhappy employees all working at 80% of their capacity, because that's what it takes to get the paycheck, you can see that you're going to have to hire another 20% more people to compensate for the 20% that the existing employees are not giving you. It's not complicated. It's really quite simple. So the stewardship of the company is going to be, how do I bring all these ideas together and make them happen? How do I use technology? What can technology do for me? Not only today, but down the road. I mean, I can't begin to tell you the number of stories that I've heard from people who say, I told my boss about this technology application or that one, and they ignored me. And now today, with the pandemic, had they been online, they would have had first access to their client base instead of no access to their client base. I mean, you could go on and on and on with these kinds of examples that they're talking about. So I think that understanding, therefore, this idea of moving from an ownership model which strictly looks at share performance to a stewardship model which tries to expand the borders of the box. Let's get people thinking outside the box. Let's start making people personally responsible for managing the diversity of the company rather than the profitability of the company. I think you'll see, and it makes sense, that you end up with, of course, a more profitable and successful organization.